Cool. Well, okay, so I'm Marsha Johnson. I had a small town growing up, and I went off to Oregon State University and majored in economics and went overseas and had a really great time, got married, had 3 children, and I had a career working for the city of Portland for a while, and then I got into counseling. So I was doing a lot of counseling, educational counseling, employment counseling. And you know, when I went back to school, I thought about something in the medical field again. I had started out thinking about that and ran into audiology at Portland State University. And I really liked the field. It combines science, mathematics, engineering, some technology, along with the human aspect of helping people. Plus, I figured out there's a lot of people, baby boomers, that were going to be having hearing problems. So I figured it was a pretty good economic market for the future. So I love business. And so I went into this field with a counseling background, a business background, an entrepreneurial kind of attitude. And when I was in my training, I spent a year at the Veterans Hospital. And they taught us how to dispense hearing aids. And so I'll tell you this story because it's relevant. We did a lot of hearing aids up there, lots of soldiers coming back. And one day there was this, really a boy. He was an 18-year-old boy. He was in some branch of the service and he had a crew cut. And he didn't have enough maturity to have facial hair yet. That's how young he was. And he had a crew cut and his big blue eyes, really young looking, and he and his friend had fooled around with some guns and it went off and right near one of his ears. And so he had lost a lot of hearing in one ear and then he had tinnitus. Yeah, so he was just a kid. And so I have this half hour, 45 minutes with him to help him. And I didn't forget this, and I still see his face. He's 25 years older now, but I was going to fit him with what we had at the time was called a masker. That's what you did for people when they had tinnitus. You fit them with a masker, and it was a hearing aid too. So the masker, was about this big, and he was kind of a country boy. He had big ears like that stuck out like that. You know what I mean? Really prominent ears and those big, pretty blue eyes. And he takes this thing in his hand, and I said, now, I'm going to be fitting this on your ear, and you're going to be using this for the tinnitus. And he said to me, okay, well, how long do I have to wear that before it goes away? That's what he said. It was a very large hearing aid in those days, and he was a very young man. And so I was going to put that on his ear. And I had no answer for that kid. I thought, I was just still in school myself, really, but I felt, I was almost 40 something. I was a second career, and I felt like I should have something I could say. So I didn't have anything I could really say. So that day I went up at lunchtime, I went to the library at the Veterans Hospital and I began collecting articles on what you could do for tinnitus. And you notice some of the time tonight I'll say tinnitus, sometimes I say tinnitus. West Coast people tend to say tinnitus. It doesn't matter how you say it. If you really were living in the time when the term was developed, you should say tinnitus, because it's Latin. It means bells ringing. So I started collecting, and I think I collected several thousand articles on tinnitus. I found out it had been studied since the 1930s, 20s, 30s, 40s. And in the 70s, Jack Vernon started the American Tinnitus Association because he had a friend that had tinnitus, and the guy told him he liked to go down and sit by Skidmore Fountain because it masked the tinnitus. So Jack Vernon was a psychologist who had friends that were scientists, that he made these maskers. And people were getting those maskers up at the Veterans Hospital. And I got friendly with, kind of friendly with all of these people later as I went into the field. So I kind of decided before I got out of graduate school that I would just focus on tinnitus. I wasn't starting out as a, 25-year-old skinny blonde girl that tested your hearing for Dr. So-and-so. And as a matter of fact, I was pretty sure in Portland, I've always liked to have my own businesses. If I can, I've always joked I don't make a very good employee. I'm better at running my own business. So I told several people when I was still at the VA, I said, I'm going to open a tinnitus clinic when I finish here. It was, by the way, an unpaid internship for a year. That's what I could get at the time. There weren't that many jobs in Portland, but you have to finish that certification. So I kept studying, and then I got introduced through the VA from a guy up there named Jim Henry. He told me about a man named Pavel Jastreboff that had come up with a new way of treating tinnitus called tinnitus retraining therapy. So my mom loaned me money, and we got money together, and I flew back to Maryland and I trained with Jastreboff. And when I came home in the summer of 1997, I opened a clinic for tinnitus, and I gave it a gigantic name. So if you know the name of my clinic, it's really long. It doesn't fit in any of those little things, but the focus for me has been on treatment. It's a treatment clinic. The important thing about all of this is just that just about everybody I've ever seen in over 20 some years now, 25 years, they know what they have when they come in my clinic. They know what they have. They're not coming in to find out that they have tinnitus. And what was available before I opened in '97 was OHSU, which was a really big institution, and you could go up there and spend 4 hours, and they would do just about every test known to humankind on your auditory system. And at the end of that visit, they were very nice people, but they would sit you down in a group like this and say, Bill, you have tinnitus. And that was it. Sometimes they would do some hearing aids or something. But if you were not local, they gave you a lot of prescriptions for Xanax and sent you off home. This was very unsatisfactory to my patient population. So I thought that we should have a treatment program. And so that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. I want to talk to you about, listen to your questions. What are they? If I can help answer what you might be able to do. If you want to know more about why you have tinnitus, we have fantastic examples in this group here. You couldn't have been better. You've got a brain injury. You've got a primary birth injury with anoxia. You have a fever. You have somebody really noisy, 2 people with noise. You've got the idiopathic person that's like, I don't know why I have it. The lightning just struck. Now I have it. I don't know why I have it. Those are very frustrating cases because, it's much easier if you go to a concert and stand next to a speaker and you know why you have it. It's easier for people, I feel, if they have a cause. So how can I help you? What is it that I can talk to you about?
Well, I just had a question about, for me, my tinnitus was roaring, but I have a sister who has ringing. And we both have been diagnosed with Meniere's. And I was just curious if you knew why some people have, they have different sounds. Like Carolyn, you've got like champagne glasses shattering.
She has kind of acoustic shock sounds. Yeah, there's very good reasons for all of these things. And, you know, so I didn't just train with Jastreboff. I also trained with Paul Davis. I mean, I have given trainings now at this point in my career. You know, so here's the thing. This is all anatomically related. Okay, so Meniere's. What is Meniere's? Meniere's is a disorder that we do not understand the cause of, but most professionals in high-level areas believe it to be an autoimmune disorder where your body begins to attack itself, which is the same thing as arthritis. Now, having said that, that's not probably accurate, but that's what we think now. You know, they used to think that people got schizophrenia because their mothers didn't love them. Remember that? And they chain you up in the church courtyard, and then they found out it was a brain chemistry disorder, that your brain was kicking out the wrong stuff. When they put you on certain medications that correct that, guess what? Those unloved schizophrenics turn back into kind of normal people. So most of these things, when we say things like autoimmune disorder, there probably is an external trigger. We just don't know what it is. Human beings we expose ourselves to many chemicals, many microwave energy, all kinds of things. We do things that we don't realize are harmful to us. We eat things, you know, we don't know. But for Meniere's at least, we can look at the cochlea. Let's do a little drawing of the ear, okay? Because that's always fun. So you've got your ear, you've got your opening to your ear canal, then you've got your eardrum down here at the bottom of the ear canal. And you know, that ear canal is actually pretty long. It's about maybe 1.5 to 2.5 inches long. It's much longer than you think. Sometimes people put a Q-tip in there a little bit. They go, oh, I'm pretty sure I poked my eardrum. But the thing is, it's lots of eardrums turn and twist, and you're basically banging up against the wall there, and the skin is really sensitive, and it's like, ah! So, you know, it is actually much harder to touch your eardrum than you think. It's down there quite a ways. The eardrum itself is attached. It has a bone right in the middle of it that attaches right in the middle. And it hooks onto two other bones. One is, you remember the old stirrup and the hammer and the... remember those names? Yeah. So this bone here is called the stapes, and it looks like a stirrup, kind of like this. It's got a little handle on it, and it's got little joints here. And this little bone here is resting on another eardrum that's on the inside part of this space. So it's resting on an eardrum, and there's an eardrum here. This is called the middle ear space, and it's hollow, and it leads down to your eustachian tube, or what we call auditory tube sometimes, and that's located just behind your uvula. If you could poke your finger straight back in your throat, it's up above there, and the purpose of that opening is to let air, oxygen, in and out of that space every time you swallow or yawn. And so right now we have this system. Now the bones are in air, and they're suspended by two ligaments that go up into the bone, and then the muscles hide up here inside the bone. There's another one here. Sometimes, for those of you, the muscles hiding up in the bone and the tendons and ligaments are attached onto this little chain of bones. This little chain of bone is just like your leg. It has articulating joints like your finger. So it can get arthritis and stiffen up. It can get damaged. It can get inflamed. It can have all kinds of little problems with that. And these little tendons and muscles can sometimes charley horse and things. So if you wake up with a bing, you ever get a bing, and it lasts for about 30 seconds to a minute? Do you ever get that? Your ear feels like it goes dead for a minute, and then it goes wong. That's a little spasm of one of those muscles in there. It pulls that chain of bones really tight and pulls in on the stapes and the eardrum. That's why you get that tightening, like my ear just went dead. What's going on? And then it sends that shock wave into the cochlea and makes a noise. That's called transient tinnitus, and that has actually nothing to worry about. Everybody has that.
Say that again. What was it called?
Transient tinnitus. That's nothing to worry about. That's just a normal phenomena. Now, the stapes, where it rests, is interesting because it actually rests in the vestibule of your balance system. Do any of you have balance issues? You have dizziness? Anybody? You have dizziness? Yeah. So this actually rests more in this is the vestibular system, and it is more actually engaged in sending in signals through that. But then we have also the cochlea. Don't feel interrupt if you have questions, okay? Please, you know. So then we have the cochlea. Cochlea has 2.5 turns. It's kind of snail-shaped, and this is where your speech hearing is. Okay? That's speech. So we have a certain frequencies, you know, that is human speech. We have low frequencies that are vowels, and then we have high frequencies that are consonants. So vowels have a lot of energy, and consonants just have a little energy, and that's t, sh, f, and h. Little brief sounds that are hard to hear when you have hearing loss. So maybe, like Caroline's not sure if they said throw or show. She has to figure it out from the speech context. Because people probably aren't going to say, you know, throw me your new car. They're going to say, show me, so you can figure out language. But this system is interesting because the vestibular system has also sensory cells. And those sensory cells are more prone for low frequency vibration. So some of my patients have a problem with low frequency vibratory energy that makes them feel dizzy or off balance. That's a clue as to where the problem is occurring. Now, inside the cochlea, there are approximately 35,000 cells that do the hearing. And the way the cochlea is arranged is very interesting, and I'm almost to my point. Down here at the opening of the cochlea, well, if you were to take a little section of this, it would be divided into 3 parts like this. And sitting on this part here, this is just one section of this, these have different positive and negative content, like a battery. And sitting right here, a little bit like that, those are your hearing cells. And they're microscopic. They are, it's like 2% of the content of that cavity is tissue. The rest is just fluid. It's like a battery. This, by the way, is about this big, and it's formed by the time you're 4 months along inside your mother, and it never grows during your life. It's completely functioning by 16 weeks. So when you were inside your mom and you were half-baked, you could hear.
That's the cochlea?
Yeah.
Now, is your drawing to scale here so that, is there only one cochlea or is there...
It's one in each ear.
Each side. But you said this is right back
this little opening
here,
right here comes down and it's right...
Cochlea is down there. And each ear has...
Each ear has a cochlea and a vestibular system.
What is the vestibular system? Is it cells, or I mean, what is it?
It's 3 channels. It's interesting. It's 3 channels filled with fluid, and what it does, the whole purpose of that organ, is to tell us what direction our head is in space. Sorry. Every mammal has this same arrangement. Whales, humans, mongoose or mongooses, mice, whatever. You have to know what direction your head is in space.
What kind of fluid is in it?
It's the same kind of fluid that's in the cochlea. It's cerebral. It's basically the same kind of fluid that's in your brain. It's cerebral spinal fluid. And it's very tight in there. Have you ever opened a bike tire in the old days and you'd open it and go, pfft, you know, if you had a bike tire? This whole system is pneumatized. It's like your lung. It's very tight. Very, very full, very present. If you get too much in there, this is where I'm getting to. So these are good questions. So this is just a clear fluid, but it has different electrical content. So some is positive and some is negative, because some has potassium, some has sodium. And when they get together, they act like a battery. So this is your balance organ. For your head, you also have another one in the back of your head. Your part of your brain tells your feet can tell if I'm standing up. Older people, have you ever known it's just older people, elderly people, they'll just pitch over all of a sudden because their cerebellum isn't working and they don't know they're falling. You know, have you ever been around an older person that just all of a sudden goes like, oh, I'm going to fall over? And they have to have a walker then because their situation. But this is a huge influence, and this is where this gets involved with Meinières. Okay? That's where we started with the question. So this whole system is pressurized. So it has a pressure level, you could say. It has a pressure level, pressure. And if the pressure gets off, things happen. The thing I want to say about the vestibular system is just that this is what lets you stand up in the dark. Or if you jump in a swimming pool, that's how you know which way is up. You don't think about those things, but we know. Like if you're swimming in a pool and you're underwater, if you didn't know which way was up, maybe you would just go sideways trying to get up. And if you were in the night, does anybody here have trouble in the night, in the pitch dark? Because you might with your situation. And when you notice that, we do these tests. You know, audiologists have tests to measure for this. And you'll see people, if you ask them to put their feet together and close their eyes and put their hands out like this, they'll just pitch over pretty quickly because they're using their eyes to let them know which way their head is. So you can do some of these things. Now, the cochlea, very interesting here with one slice. There is a kind of a placental tissue here that goes around. It's called the stria vascularis. I'm just going to put a SV. The stria vascularis has got all the blood supply for the cochlea, and it also lets fluids in and out. This is very important because that's how we're replenishing the fluid. And out of the cochlea, there's one little duct. And this duct is letting a little fluid out all the time. So the new fluid is being replaced and the old is coming out. However, if this gets blocked up, and this can happen to people, the lowest end of the cochlea here, down at the opening we say, that's where all your high frequency cells are, and at the very top up here, that's where the low frequency cells are. So finally we get here. When you have Meinières, the pressure regulation is off. So you get pressure building up in the inner ear. And people often say, I have pressure in my ear, I feel nauseated or dizzy, I hear a roaring tinnitus. Roaring. A roaring tinnitus is almost always related to something wrong in the cochlea and the vestibular system. It's a whole bunch of cells the whole way. And when the cochlea gets backed up, unfortunately, the area that gets damaged by this pressure is this low frequency area. So when people have Meinières and get tinnitus, you look at their audiogram, you know, the hearing test, you can see they've lost low frequency hearing, but their upper hearing is pretty good, okay? And the low frequency hearing comes and goes, and over time, when you have this disease, you'll have a problem, then a recovery, then a problem, and eventually it kind of spreads across the thing, like that. You have pressure, sometimes your eyes wiggle back and forth, they call that nystagmus. The problem is the pressure is building up in here. In this cochlea, it's fascinating because these little cells are very cute, little hair cells. They don't really have hair on them, that's not true. They have cilia that stick out like your gut. They look like that. And they sit on this membrane called the tectorial membrane. And that's a hair cell. That's an inner hair cell. And they have lots of these little fibers that stick up. And the problem is when you ride motorcycles and you work in paper mills, sound is too loud, so these start breaking over. Like grass, when you walk on the grass too much, you know, you got a kid that doesn't want to use the sidewalk and they make a path and you're like, eh. So they start breaking over, and when these break over, then they're on all the time. Beep, usually start out really soft. I didn't even know where it came from. Beep, I can usually only hear it in quiet, then sometimes it gets louder. Sometimes that can happen if you go to a concert or something really suddenly, because your ear is only made really for sounds that humans make, right? So if you go to an electronic big speaker thing, you're exposing yourself to this huge amount of sound that we normally can't make as human beings. in our natural state running around in the bushes hunting things. So it's not really set up for that. The other thing that's in there sitting right next to it is these little things called outer hair cells, and you've got 3 rows of those, and they're actually helper cells, and they help us to hear soft sounds. But they can be damaged too by noise or poisons or chemicals or whatever. So is this helpful to see the anatomy? I'm giving you a very brief look, but that's what's inside your head, that's what's in your ear, and you've got 35,000 of these cells in each one of your cochleas. And when you start out your life and you have excellent hearing, of course, as a child, you know, everybody starts out usually, except for Caroline here, they start out with excellent hearing, and then over time you just run into sounds, and people's hearing just goes down. It gets less as you get older in our country because we do so many noisy things. If you're living out in the desert, far away from everything, in Africa or somewhere, the old people have really good hearing.
You know, I've met a lot of people through this cochlear implant support group I go to up in Beaverton. It seems like almost all of them have had sudden hearing loss. They just wake up one day and they've lost their hearing.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. Fortunately, it's rare. When that does happen, again, what you're doing, you've wiped out the cochlea. You might have had a leak. You might have had a total collapse of the system because of some immune problem. Sometimes it's not easy to understand what happens. Sometimes you get a viral invasion in there. It can seep around the foot plate here of the stapes, or it can go into the round window. There's another eardrum here. And when you get an ear infection, the toxic material builds up and it corrodes and it leaks into the systems. And some people, though, don't even have that. They wake up and they can't hear. I've had a number of those patients. It's very disturbing.
I have a question about the depth into, I see where the outer part of the ear is there, where that earlobe is supposed to be. So how many centimeters are we talking about inside from the earlobe? Are we talking about this being located? And because there's obviously the bone of the skull protects it, but how many centimeters in from the exterior is that?
Well, you know, the ear canal itself is about 1.5 to 1.75 inches, 2 inches long. The middle ear space is like 1/4 inch wide. It's extremely small. And then there's the cochlea right there. So altogether, you know, I usually tell people, think of it like right behind your eyeball and maybe down slightly. Straight back in there. This is the hardest bone of your body, the temporal bone. The body is really trying to protect the hearing. Hearing is just essential. You can't survive without hearing in the wild. I'm talking about like long ago, right? They said to Helen Keller, would you rather have your eyes or your ears? And she said, I would rather have my ears. I wished I still had my ears. But it is delicate. It's trying to protect it in there.
I had another question. I mean, I don't want to monopolize the questions. Does anybody else have a good? Well, I'm pretty sure it was a doctor that told me that because after I had my implant, you know, my tinnitus kind of went away unless if I took it off, and he said it was because when you're losing your hearing, your brain has to fill up that, you know, loss, and so that's where the tinnitus comes in. Does that make sense to you?
Well, this is the other aspect. It is interesting. You know, you're talking about my favorite subject here, so it's really fun for me. I hope you're having fun. I don't know if you're having fun, but the auditory system is really interesting because it is truly an input-output system. People do not understand that. So you have, you've got your ears, you've got your whole system here with the cochleas. Okay. The cochleas, the nerve leads down to your brain stem. Okay, there's your neck, there's your vertebra. Every organ that you have in your head, every sensory system leads to the brain stem. Basically, we are very similar to worms that have these sets of nerves that come out of a brain stem. That's what a vertebrate is, right? That's what a neural tube, that's the first thing that forms. And each one of these does something. There's an eye, there's your mouth, there's your ear, there's your you know, your chin, your eyebrows, your nose. A couple of these cranial nerves lead down, called the vagus, if you've ever heard of that. That's the traveler. And they keep your heart beating and your guts digesting and your diaphragm working. That's why if you break your neck, you don't die, because your vagus nerve comes from up here and goes down, keeps your heart beating, unless you break it really, really high. So the thing is, the information comes into the ears, down to the brainstem, and then in the brainstem, it's really interesting because these go in and they're like plants. They have roots that spread out and they intermesh and they interlock. And I see many, many people with car accidents, motor vehicle accidents with whiplash and head injuries. And because when they bang their heads, it pulls some of those fibers out of the brainstem area, and then you get a malfunction going in there. So I see this all the time. And sometimes people have had, you know, whiplash, and they never realized that that was the cause of the tinnitus, because sometimes it can be several months later the tinnitus starts. It doesn't have to be right away. So I go to court on these things all the time. And so once it comes into the brainstem area, then there's some layers here, okay? This is what we call your old brain. This is important for people with tinnitus, because what the old brain does is it regulates sleep, heart rate, hunger, joie de vivre, feeling well, hate, irritation, anger. Many people with tinnitus, when it first starts, they have terrible insomnia because it's affected this old brain down here. Very common for people to have even a year. Sometimes initially they're only sleeping 1 hour a night. They can't figure it out. 2 hours a night, maybe. You know, this first onset of tinnitus can be very dramatic like this. And just over this old part of the brain, then we have another layer that we call the limbic system, and that's your emotional brain. That's all your feelings. That's why, like if we are in, you know, we have a song we love from high school. I hate those guys that drive those big rigs with that boom, boom, boom. You know, remember the rappers that go by your house and you hear that and your windows are shaking, and I just hate that. You know, I don't even have to hear it to really hate it. All of a sudden my ears are picking up on that, and I'm just like, ugh, I'm in a bad mood. Why? Because there's a rattly kid out there in a car going by, and I don't like it. But I do love, you know, like Chicago and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and you know, if they played that, I would be like, yay, turn it up, you know. So these are our feelings, and this is very important in tinnitus too, because some of you might say, I can't stand that sound. Like Carolyn has an orchestra in her head, so I know that about her. So some of her sounds, she might say, okay, I can deal with you. You're no big deal, but you gotta go. Okay, and so we have these different impressions about things. Then, so here's the thing, out of the brainstem, you have all these fibers rising, and they're mixing together, and they're coming up to what we call our thinking brain. And this is your thinking brain. This is what makes us human. I call it above the eyebrows brain. You know, we love our pets, but they do not have foreheads. You know, that's what's there. And weirdly, the auditory cortex is here. It's right here, but it has to travel down, and then it comes back up. So now we got to the auditory cortex. That's good. That's where it puts together DOG is dog or whatever. So that's the auditory cortex. Now in the auditory cortex, like in the cochlea, every one of these cells in the cochlea has a wire. That wire makes its way through this system up to the auditory cortex. It might be a few connections along the way, but in that cortex, there is what they call a tonotopic strip. There's a strip, and that strip has the low frequencies here and the high frequencies here. So it is just like your cochlea with low tones, mid, and high. So this signal, let's say it's a high tone, it goes to the high tone region. Now, here's the thing. Instantly, your brain sends a signal back to your cochlea. Instantly. It's an input-output system. So it's got the tone, ding, it sends back information. It sends it to both sides of your brain. So if we were to draw a diagram, we could say, Information goes down and goes up. It gets mixed together, and then information comes down to both sides, from both sides of your brain. And it's kind of messy, but it tells your cochlea what to do. It says, that sound is too soft. These little outer hair cells have a little membrane that sits on top like this. And basically, they can move their bodies up and down, like weightlifters in a way. They can make them tall and skinny or short and fat. And they bang that membrane on the inner hair cell, and it tells it what to do, so you can hear. So when you disturb your structures somehow, you cut off the flow of the energy from some of these cells because of these different things, the information doesn't get up to the area it should. And the information doesn't come back the way it should. The best way to think of this is like an 8-lane freeway in Seattle. You know those terrible freeways up there? And they have those left exits, which really my husband detests. There you got 8 lanes going, and then you've got 8 lanes coming the same way back at us. Everybody has their 16 lanes. Suddenly one of your lanes decides to drive crazy. They're out of their lane. They're driving over there. And now your brain says, there's a problem here. There's an imbalance. We're going to create a cacophony. We're going to hear a sound. Or, like you said, there's nothing coming in. I'm missing a whole strip of attention, and so what am I supposed to listen to? I know, I'll listen to the inside of my head noise, because that's at least something I can listen to. That's why, that's the fantastic thing with you when you put your implant on, when you put your hearing aids on, when you use sound therapy or whatever you're doing, hearing aids, you help assist these cells, which are either missing or damaged, and now you're giving the brain something to do which it is much more interested in than your tinnitus. So it will, about 50% of people just putting hearing aids on will find their tinnitus diminishes pretty dramatically, which is happy news, but you don't know if you're one of those people till you try it, right? You don't know. You have to try it and see. You might not be. You might be one of the 50% that it doesn't diminish. But does that help? It's kind of crazy, isn't that the way it works? Input-output system.
I'm not familiar with the term old brain. Is that just a name, or?
Well, it's like the lowest.
Here, and then you're saying we have an old brain down there. Yeah. What makes it old, and how is it part of the brain?
I've heard it called the reptile brain.
It's often called the reptilian part of our brain. I don't like the word reptile. I have a friend that uses the word lizard brain all the time. I don't personally like to think of myself as lizard in some way. I don't mind lizards, but I don't love them. It's just the, like, you know, evolutionary wise, or if you believe in creationism, it doesn't matter to me which one. Because to me, God creates anything he likes, whether, you know what I mean? So we have that. Like the same thing alligators. I always love alligators as examples, because alligators, they're not thinking about anything. If you poke them with a stick, they will bite it. If you don't poke them with a stick, they will bite you. If they feel sleepy and they're full, they've just eaten, they don't care, they're not going to bite you. If they, you know, they don't think, they just are. So that's that part. That's the part you don't control, because that's your heart rate. See, they know, they've done a lot of studies on you people. They know that when your tinnitus is really loud, your heart rate goes up, you're sweating more, you're agitated, your body is producing more hormones. You're under stress just the way anybody would be if we taped a smoke detector to your head, which is usually what I want to do to all the doctors I meet, because I'm like, they're like, oh, you'll get used to it. And they're like, no, they aren't. Not all of them get used to it. Some of them do, but they're like, well, I haven't and I got used to it. And it's like, well, because you don't have what they have. You got a scratch on your finger right there and their arm is broken and the bone is sticking out. You can't say, oh, you'll get used to it. So that's a good question. Yes?
The tubes over here, the helper tubes.
These little outer hair cells.
How do they help the cochlea?
They make soft sounds louder. That's why I haven't heard anybody say you have sound sensitivity. Nobody has hyperacusis?
I did.
Yeah, so sound sensitivity is really the pits.
Yeah, it was really bad.
It's not fun. But the thing is, I love to tell this, especially to guys, because it's kind of cute, but We are hardwired for human speech, just like every other species, right? So red-legged frogs are hardwired to hear other red-legged frogs. Well, we are all wired to hear each other talk. That's how it works. And actually men, it's a curious thing, you guys are naturally hardwired to hear women talk. Women are hardwired to hear everybody talk, but higher pitched voices, but men particularly have hardwiring for higher pitched voices. I always joke and I say, you guys weren't looking for the other guys in the bushes. When we were running around in the bushes, you were not looking for other men. You were actually looking for the girls.
I think I need to learn to talk to my husband in a lot higher voice. He doesn't hear me.
I know, well, my friend sent me something I put back on Facebook. It said, my husband is my best secret keeper. He never shares anything I tell him. And then it says, because he's not listening to me anyway. So here's the deal. So if you think, like if this is a graph, and right here is human conversational level, which is about 50 to 70 decibels. That's where we really talk easily. That's where even people that have hearing impairment, if you just sit one-on-one, they can usually hear you just fine, just one-on-one, just talking. So these outer hair cells have a function. They are supposed to amplify sound to that area, and then they're supposed to turn off. And that's their helper function. And the way they do that is because these little guys can change their bodies from tall and skinny to short and fat, and they've got those fibers sticking up, the cilia. So basically, it's kind of like having a piece of paper, you know, and they're hitting it on the inner hair cells when they want you to hear something soft, and then they're supposed to stop. The problem with people when they get injured sometimes initially from sound or something, they keep working, and then my patients are like, yikes, everybody's screaming, it's too loud, I can't stand it. Even just everyday noises, just that little tap tap I did, they'd be like, oh, I gotta wear earplugs. So that's hyperacusis. That's an additional amplification that is very bothersome. And you can see that after car accidents and poisonings and all kinds of stuff too. It's almost unfair to ask me to explain all these things in an hour because, you know, I could do 2-3 hours easy. Yes, because I'm going to let you have that question.
Should they know why some people only have tinnitus on one side of one ear rather than the opposite ear, other ear?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And people generally come in. How many of you have tinnitus louder in one ear, you feel? Yeah. Your brain has a dominant side. What's funny, people often will hear it louder in one ear, and sometimes like after, let's say, an explosive event. There was a lady that was a cashier at the federal building downtown, and she was reading a romance novel in a courtyard, and a natural gas thing blew up out of its vault right next to her. And she got hearing loss and tinnitus in this ear. And it was really strong in this ear, but she noticed over the course of time, I worked with her about 3 years or so, she noticed it also moved over to the other ear. So lots of times it can start in the peripheral system, but then it moves into the brain pretty rapidly because of this effect I talked about, that it's an input-output system. So it's like you have 10 people upstairs that are working for you, and you made 2 of them sit down and just duct tape them all still. And after a while, they just went to sleep, and they don't care anymore because they're not doing anything. And then, you know, so they're not producing anything, and you're like, why aren't you making stuff? It's a lack of response coming back from them. And that takes a little while to set in. It's not immediate. But many, many people, when I touch them in the sound booth, I put them in the sound booth, and I'll mask out the dominant ear, and then they'll say, oh, you know what? Now I hear something over here. It's a little different. But the one ear often will dominate, and you'll just hear it in that one. Is that the case for you?
For most of my 20 years, I've had the tinnitus just in one ear.
The left. And the left is more popular than the right. I don't know why. It's been studied. It'd be very simple, though, to put do you have any hearing loss that you know?
I do. That's another question I have that I don't understand when I go to hearing. I mean, I had hearing tests before I had tinnitus.
Yeah.
and you go in and they have the little beep, 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 and you're supposed, and so you indicate when you hear them. But when I go in now, I'm going, how do you know what my hearing is? Because my theory is I can't hear your beeps, some of them, because of the tinnitus.
Absolutely. Tinnitus gets like this, right? You're like, you can't quite see.
It's like if she started up her motorcycle outside here, and then we're having trouble hearing you.
Yeah.
You haven't changed anything.
Yeah.
I haven't changed anything, but there's now an external sound.
Periphery.
So I'm very slow in my hearing test. Caroline and he can tell you, I'm slow. I don't go fast. And I find out if you have beeping tinnitus, steady state tinnitus, I find out what your tinnitus is. And then I present like beep, beep, beep. And I agree with you what you're going to listen for, because people say, I'm not sure if that's you or me. So I have techniques I've developed for 20-some years to make sure, because, you know.
I'm taking it with regular people, and they give the same test the same way. And so I don't really know. I don't believe that I know or they know what my hearing is or my hearing loss is, because I've got it masked. And they're just going, did you hear that? I'm going, no, I didn't hear it, but there's an ocean in my left ear.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It can take several tests, and sometimes, again, here's the thing though. So the audiogram, you know, you've got your low frequency and your highs. The vast majority of people have tinnitus between about 3,000 to 6,000 hertz. This is the vast majority of people. And most people have pretty normal low frequency, and then they start losing hearing up here. And they do that because, again, the high frequency cells are sitting right at the opening of the cochlea, and that's where all the activity is happening. And they break down first. It's called the noise notch. So your tinnitus is probably at one frequency or somewhere around, well, let's say it's here. So this zone, yeah, you might have trouble in that zone. You might not be accurate, but if it's not quite the same pitch, they're probably going to get fairly accurate results around it. You know, I mean, it's not going to be all the frequencies unless you have a roaring tinnitus, and then that makes it more challenging. But in another weird way, it makes it easier too, because you can hear beep, 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 beep. But that's a common thing. I can't tell you how many times people have come in and said, I don't think my hearing results are accurate. But here's what I know, regardless of what they are, let's say you have some hearing loss. If you were in my clinic and it was a free world, I say, here's what you need, let's get this on you, and we don't have to talk about money. It drives me crazy. But that's not where we are. So we would put a hearing aid on the left ear that had a focus area in your zone, and we would see if it would give you relief. When you have hearing loss and you pull all the thresholds back up to normal, the tinnitus doesn't have any hold on your system. Your system is not interested in it, trust me. And this isn't something you do psychologically. I do feel sorry for people. I hope you get that from me tonight. I really do. You guys have my heart sympathy, because it's just a terrible thing. It can be a terrible thing, and I really have a lot of sympathy for you, but I have found things that work. So that's the good news.
I went on this website, and it was sounds of tinnitus or something like that. And it showed all these different people with some type of electronic noise. This is my tinnitus, and it would play and sound. And I was like, oh wait, that's mine. Called my husband over, and I'm like, this is what it sounds like. Let me get the amplification. You know, let me turn it up a little bit.
Yes.
He's like, oh, that's not ringing in your ears. That is. He goes, I had no idea. And it's like, it's hard to describe. And everybody's is so different.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
So different.
And it can change over the course of your life or different things.
Yeah, and to me, there's nothing more annoying than you go to your ENT or your regular doctor and they say, oh yeah, sometimes my ears ring too. No.
I did a study on that, because I went up to OHSU. They were selling their otolaryngology textbooks from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and I went and looked at them. And the beginning sections, there were some pretty fat pages on tinnitus. As it went along, got down to 2 or 3 pages. It said, tell the patient, you know, basically they might have a tumor, so you're going to do a CAT scan to rule that out. Well, that scares everybody half to death. They don't tell you that it's a benign tumor like those fatty tumors that dachshunds get, those little bumps on the side of their body. They don't tell you that. But rule out the tumor, which is, it's more likely tonight that you'll walk out and get attacked by a puma. Or be struck by lightning. 3 times more likely. So they don't tell you that part, but then they say, reassure the patient that it'll be okay. And my patients, you know, they don't get reassured. They get kind of mad and they keep searching around till they find me because I don't advertise. I mean, I have a website, but I don't advertise at all. I've never advertised. I get referrals from physicians. I've had patients from all over the world. The last patient I saw from far away was like Hong Kong, Brazil, Canada. People they want to get better. They want to find a way. So I want to make sure I get this information to you. There are 3 things you can do about tinnitus. Okay? And those 3 things have been the same since the time of the Romans. The physician who wrote about it, these are the same 3 things. 1, you can get some counseling. Because mindfulness and cognitive therapy, how to deal with things in your life, if you have something incurable and you have to live with it, counseling is really helpful. I love counseling. It comes with almost everybody's insurance policies. You can try different types of counseling. The problem for me, especially when I see couples, is, and it really is a sad thing, but they come in, they've had a busy, happy life, whatever going on, and when one of them gets tinnitus, all of a sudden, or Meniere's, that's their main topic of conversation. And it really changes marriages and relationships with families, whatever, because it's invisible, you look fine, and they're like, well, let's get on with life. And you're like, I have this thing, I don't feel like it. I didn't sleep last night. You know, some people have pain and so forth. But so counseling is really good, to have that person to help you think of ways to deal with this, you know, this thing. We don't have a cure yet, but actually some stuff is coming down the line, so don't give up. Number 2 was drugs. In the times of the Romans, you know, it was wine and whatever else they had. Nowadays, you can take all sorts of anti-anxiety and a little bit of Xanax, and I always recommend that people go get drugs if they have insomnia. The number 1 problem with tinnitus is insomnia. If you don't sleep well, the tinnitus goes haywire. That's a fact. We know that, studying 40,000 people. So whatever little bridge drug you need to get to sleep, take it. And people are like, I don't want to take drugs. I'm like, try it. But don't, you know, some people have had bad reactions to drugs. Don't take those. But, you know, if you don't like Xanax, try something else. There's lots of them.
Now, that was my one big question is, do long-term use of some of these things have any effect on the structure or anything like that?
Not that we know of.
Because I you know, I did 11 months of benzos, and I stopped because they started making me sick. And once I stopped, they made me sicker. And once I stopped, I just felt like things started getting really weird in my head. So clicking, my neck was really stiff.
Withdrawal from those things can be really bad.
Yeah, and then stuff in my jaw and my ear would, you know, when I yawn or stretch my mouth out, it just clicks and clicks and clicks and snaps and snaps and snaps.
You've got a eustachian tube dysfunction in there too. You know, but you have damaged nerves. You've got a whole interesting host of things.
Yeah, I got all kinds of stuff.
But you know, they don't recommend benzos for people with tinnitus. It's like NSAIDs. They don't recommend those. There is a couple ones I've become aware of, like Effexor, for example. I've had a whole bunch of patients that withdrawal from Effexor for depression has caused tinnitus and other problems. So you do have to be careful, but that's why I'm mentioning Xanax. It's a weird drug. It can actually cause tinnitus as well as help it. So that's weird, and a lot of physicians are reluctant to give it to you because it's highly addictive. But there are lots of other, even naturopathic type remedies too. Yeah, take things like that. Just make sure you try to get your sleep. So nowadays we're working on targeted drugs, but we don't really have any yet. I always hate to say this, but even despite all these 100 years of research, they don't know where this comes from yet. It's really annoying. You know, we're pretty still out there ways. But the third thing, the most common source is as what I do, obviously, there's sound therapies. And in the Roman days, they said to go stand by the ocean. So sound therapies is the #1 thing to help yourself. So you play your radio, that's perfect. You just need a fan on by your bed. And for you, when you have tinnitus at your level, you just say, hey there, how you doing? Love you. I'm going to get busy, do my thing, whatever. That's great kind of tinnitus. And it might just stay there for the rest of your life like that. That's okay.
Most of the time I'm not even aware of it.
Right,
I've
so-
been aware of it for the last hour or so.
Yeah, right. You don't want to really call it up. It's like the Halloween monster. Don't go wake it up. You really shouldn't be at this meeting. If you'd called me, I would have said don't come. But I've only had a couple patients whose tinnitus completely went away. There was a guy that had his gallbladder out from LA. He came up, really great guy, a machinist actually, and he had hearing loss, and he was going through treatment. We've been going about 6 months or something. And he called. He said, I had to have my gallbladder out because I keep in touch with my patients a pretty long time. And he said, guess what? I'm like, what? And he's like, the tinnitus went away when I got out of surgery. And I was like, what? And he goes, should I keep using my sound equipment or not? And I was like, okay, just give me a minute here. Let me think. Patient does not have symptom. Should he use treatment equipment? So I'm from Coos Bay, right? So I'm like, no, I think you should just don't use it. If you don't have it, it doesn't make sense. So then I said, call me back though. And so then he called me back in a month and he said, it didn't come back. Should I still not use it? And I'm like, yes, do not use it, So he was an unusual guy. And since that time, I've told patients that and they're like, well, I'm going to have my gallbladder out. But I don't know exactly what it was. But so sound therapy is mostly delivered through hearing aids, but also through retraining devices like neuromonics. You don't have to get the hearing aid. 30% of my patients don't have hearing loss. Great hearing, they just have tinnitus. Maybe a different part of the brain, something. So there's retraining devices these are all very spendy things, but you can do your own home thing too. Now, you can get Bluetooth devices, you can play neutral sounds. I love this app called Relax Melodies, my favorite app. You can put it on a speaker in your pillow. You can get, this is an app, it's free, and then if you pay $2.99, you can get a dozen more sounds. This is a big deal, get this. You can get a sleep phone for $40 from Amazon. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful polar fleece band with flat speakers. You know how you try to put something in your ears, you can't sleep? These are flat. You can turn on ocean, rain, wind. We use them when we travel. I love them. You put them on, you don't hear anything. You sleep in motels, and people love to do this kind of thing. You can do your home program because in sound therapy, you're buying kind of spendy devices. Can be $1,800, $2,400, $3,000. I'm not going to go into my rational profit theory with you. I'm an old hippie. I want to work, remember, for universal health care. I don't like profiting off people now. So, all right, these are things that this is what we do now. Okay, things not to do. Do not buy weird products over the internet. Nothing. Crapola. You're wasting your money. Just take your $90 and throw it out the window as you drive through McMinnville. Don't take lipoflavonoids. Doctors love that one. If you look at your dinner plate and it's a rainbow, you're fine. If you're eating only white rice and white bread, you got a problem anyway. If you eat colored foods, you're getting lipoflavonoids. Okay? Seriously. Don't waste your money. I called this for fun and I talked to the guy. Come out magazine. $90 a year, money back, guaranteed. So I called him up. I said, I'm an audiologist. I'm thinking about stocking your product. Oh, well, we're going to let you talk to a mid-level manager. I'm like, I've heard really good things about it. I'm just having fun, So I get to the mid-level manager. I said, how's this stuff working? This is like a little drop you put in or whatever. It's working great. I said, how do you know? How do you know? Well, he says, only 15% of people return it. We got an 85% success rate. I said, oh, that's fantastic. And I mean, I went and I started researching, like if you order something off the internet, how many of us return it if it doesn't fit, or if it's not the right color, or if it's, you know how many people return stuff? It's like 3%. People are just like, oh, I really messed up. That shirt doesn't fit. I shouldn't have bought it. I'm just going to give it to the Goodwill. I can't find the return slip. It's been 2 months. I forgot to do it. I mean, how is that true for you guys? Do you send stuff back if it doesn't?
I do. I'm in that 3%.
Have you ever had a product that, has anybody ever had a product you ordered? Like I got a shower thing that was supposed to work off Facebook ridiculously, and it was like a thing with BBs in it. My husband's looking at it. It's plastic and it doesn't even fit. He's like, well, how much did you pay for this? You know, I mean, and I'm just like, I should have thrown that away before you came home. So these things don't really work. Now, if it works for you, I think it's fantastic. Okay, you might be the one person that it works for, but you know what I'm saying?
I notice like if I have too much salt,
You get increased pressure. You know what? It replaces the water in here almost immediately? Alcohol. That's why when you drink and you stagger, that's what you affect. You replaced your, so if you have a salt problem, like if you have Meinières, one of the first things they have you do generally is just quit all salt and take maybe a mild diuretic. So, is this helpful? Is it fun? Is it interesting? You're not going to sleep yet?
Yeah. Yeah, because, you know, I've heard 2 or 3 different things from my regular doctors, my ENTs. You know, they don't have any information of.
Well, here's the deal. Get with the audiologists locally. You get a 30-day trial for instruments. You can try them for 30 days and just pay a small fee. And there's special instruments. 2 of the biggest companies that make instruments that are meant for people with tinnitus that I use these 2, Widex and Signia. And they both have instruments that have tinnitus programs in them. So they have built-in tinnitus therapy programs.
And these are like hearing aids?
They're hearing aids. And even people with mild loss can benefit from these.
I tried some of those, and that was great and wonderful, but, you know, in your day-to-day sounds, and I'd have to say mine's, like on a scale of 1 to 10, mine's probably a good 9 all the time. But when you're laying down trying to sleep, it's a 50.
Yeah, you got to get a sleep phone.
Yeah, you don't wear your hearing aids to bed, so.
You need to get that sleep phone and have something at night. Absolutely important to avoid silence 24 hours.
And there was something else, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
There's a lady that I know who, for some reason, her voice was just like
grating.
Oh, it's just grating, and I thought, this lady, I just can't stand her. And then I realized it's not her, it's
your damaged cells
of her voice.
Yeah. And your over hyperactive outer hair cells. So she sounds screechy and fingernails on the chalkboard. Yeah. Do other things bother you at all, like microwave beeps or putting the dishes away? Or
earlier there was sound coming from out here, and it was just raising my hair like that.
So that's another thing. These units, if you use them with the therapy programs on for a certain period of time per day, your sound sensitivity will decrease over time because you're doing physical therapy on the cells. If you're avoiding sound and trying to stay away from the woman with that voice and that kind of thing, then you get more sensitive because now you're not stimulating those areas. So it's a little backwards thinking, you know what I mean?
No, I understand, because like I'll wear an ear plug in my ear at night because every once in a while my husband will snore at a certain pitch.
Well, I wear an earplug too, but earplugs are good in those situations.
Not at all.
Oh,
it's a pitch.
Like a little snort?
It's just a little.
Well, you really need to look into these sleep phones.
Okay.
Sleep phones are really cool. They look like one of those trailblazers, you know? They got this little band on your head, and then it's got these flat speakers, absolutely flat, so that you can lay on your side. I'll tell you, that is a blessing. If you can get the ocean and the rain or something. Yes, ma'am.
I was so sorry. You know, I was just sitting in my house the other day and thinking, you know, I know how bad this is now. What happens when I'm 80? and maybe my brain's not working too well, and this is all I hear.
Some studies show it gets better as you get older. Some studies show that. And you might get dementia too, so you won't know what's going on, but you know.
That'd be joyous.
Isn't that happiness? Did you get your...
I just heard recently that people with hearing loss are prone to get dementia, is that?
Well, it exacerbates their situation, although I have read that study too, but I keep wanting to see the numbers because it's kind of like 2% more, 10% more. What is it really? Because I think the hearing aid dealers are loving it because they're putting up big signs in their front window. Hearing aids just stave off Alzheimer's, and everybody's like, yes. But you know, I want to see the numbers. Well, did you get your question answered?
Well, maybe I'll just email you, but you know, to your point, what you were saying, I mean, because every time I read that, I just get pissed, you know, because I think, and I get scared too, because I think I don't want to, my mom's got Alzheimer's, so I'm just like, I do not want to get dementia. But I think part of it, at least for me, is I miss so much. You know, so my brain's just not getting stimulated. My brain spends so much time trying to decide if it's a sh or a k, you know, with words, or thinking, oh wait, it must mean this because they said this, you know, where my brain's just having to work to understand what I'm hearing, that I don't have time to like do anything else other than that.
It's an effort, definitely. It's like trying to walk with one leg shorter than the other, but I think it's glasses and hearing, and it's also stimulation. It's, you know, they said in England, these old pensioners, the one person that they see every day is the person they buy a grocery from, the one person they talk to. They've got a whole group now going to try to make connections with these older people that live by themselves that just sink away because there's nothing going on, there's nothing to look forward to. I think that's an area as a society and a culture I think we need to really take up here. Yes?
I have kind of a twofold question. I guess the one thing I do want to comment on is that I understand the concept of working harder to determine things, but I also, just because I grew up this way, everybody always comments on my multitasking. Maybe it's creating more neural networks though. I mean, the more you process, don't you maybe we're smarter because we have tinnitus or something, I don't know.
Yes, I definitely agree. You're all smarter. No, but it does have to do with personality too. So tinnitus is dreadfully affected by personality. Absolutely. The person that is more of a perfectionist, a person, a high achiever, they want to know everything. They are frustrated by the lack of the interference with their communication. The more happy-go-lucky, sanguine people that are like, oh yeah, you made a dent in the car. That's no big deal. I knew there was going to be a dent. It doesn't bother me at all. I mean, that person is less affected in some ways because just their personality trait. You know, you have to look at your personality trait too. If you tend to be anxious or depressed, a lot of my patients have a history of depression and so forth. It lends itself to it in a way, and that's where the counseling comes in. And you know, I have patients, you know, really honestly, these single men that live by themselves basically, and maybe they aren't able to work or whatever. They're very lonely and they don't have a lot of activity, and I spend a lot of time with them saying, look, your homework this month is you're going to have to call up a friend and go out and have coffee, and you're going to have to go to one event in your community, because they have really let this take over their life, and you have to kind of walk them back out. And then they find, actually, you know, how many of you find you are better when you're really involved in something? Something that interests you. For couples, I'll often put a limitation. I'll say you can't talk to her anymore about your tinnitus. You can talk to her for 10 minutes a day and you have to set the timer. It can't be the constant topic of your life, because what did you talk about before he got tinnitus or she got tinnitus? And then they're like, oh yeah, we used to have other things we did. So
my question was, when, because I know they do scans now and they study the brain, what's happening in your brain when you're frightened, you're angry, or part of the brain lights up. So the two sides of my question are, do different parts of the brain light up for tinnitus, hyperacusis, misophonia, or are they all the same spot? Is it all the lizard brain, or what? Do they light up different areas?
It's a good question. The misophonia is too new. You know, I've pioneered that effort for 20-some years. I had to go back to New York City and be on the Today Show and Good Morning America, and I had some lady that makes up Oprah make me up, this makeup room of which I do not own any makeup, but there we were, New York City. So I got a real interesting thing there for a while, but misophonia is too new to study. But tinnitus, Salvey and Lockwood did a study some years ago, and they found people that could voluntarily induce tinnitus by shifting their jaw movements. They could change, and quite a few people can do this. Some of you might be able to too. If you open your jaw or press, you can change the timbre or the tone. And so they studied these guys because they could really crank it up and drop it off. And the one area that lit up, which is so surprising because everybody thought it was going to be the cochlea. They had a little betting. People thought it would be the auditory cortex. It was the brain stem area. Like a Christmas tree of lights, both in different conveying, transmitting mechanisms, like electrical, like sugar uptake, like a whole bunch of transmitter production. It was the brainstem again and again. So something there happens in the brainstem. That's that first mixing point, and something happens in people who have tinnitus that seems to be connected there. Were you given any anesthesia during this?
No. Or well,
Were you giving a local, weren't you?
Local anesthesia.
Yeah. It could have been lidocaine.
Probably.
Lidocaine is something they use for dentists too, and different things like that to make you numb. Lidocaine has been shown when you're on an IV with lidocaine, they can make your tinnitus go away. It's not a practical solution now.
Sound by the electronic imaging machine.
It could have been too. I mean, many patients of mine get tinnitus from MRI machines because they're not wearing the headphones. You're supposed to wear headphones in some of these things. So it could have been that. It could have been your procedure. More likely than not, though, your system, because you know, if they inject you in a certain part of your body, it goes everywhere, right? That's very interesting. I mean,
I thought it was extremely interesting. So after it was over, I told the doctors about it because I was hoping they could convey that information back to people studying tinnitus.
Well, the hopeful world, these are still our three main things, but down the road, there is some really terrific hope in brain implants and small chips that they're putting in terminal Parkinson's disease patients, and they're finding the right spot while these people are awake and the trembling stops, right? There's a few of those individuals, turns out they had tinnitus. And when they would click on their little chip, they reported like this. My tinnitus went away when I clicked that on. So there are some therapies, but you have to understand that it's extremely invasive. That's to the extreme. Right now, all of you guys are fairly healthy people who have this annoying symptom, but you're functioning well. And this is why they're not going to take a nice, healthy person and put a chip in their brain. There's a little company in France that's developed a little pump that you can press behind your ear and it'll deliver a little dose of medication to your cochlea. And you can pump it there so many times. And that study's on hold now. The person that was funding it decided to put his money somewhere else. But
Does it put lidocaine in there?
it's a special, it's called proprietary stuff. But there's things coming. I mean, I want you to hold out a lot of hope and do get with the American Tinnitus Association. They try to give money out to the new theory, the new programs coming out, and you can read about them in their magazine. But some of my patients, I say, don't go there because if you think about the tinnitus, it gets worse. No searching for tinnitus all night long and getting all upset. That's not good. Look up like where to go on vacation and fun things to do, okay? You can, if you want to ever get in touch with me and say, hey, this is kind of my situation, do you have anything more specific? I'd be happy to spend a few minutes with you. I give away phone time for free.
Quick question, one of my worst fears is my hearing aids go out. We have a hearing aid repair place here. Would you recommend I go back to see you for a repair if I ever need it? Or would you recommend, you know, just any other place?
Yeah, you know, it's so easy with priority mail now to just drop it overnight. And then if I can fix 99% of them just like that. If I can't fix it, they have to go to the manufacturer. Sometimes I'll send you a loaner set. Yeah, because I've had patients buy 2 sets over the course of their time because they do not want to be without, especially if they're traveling a lot, you know. So that's a really expensive deal, but still. Yeah, and people here should be able to fix it. If you get somebody that deals with Widex or Signia, the 2 brands I use, if there's somebody here, you just go by and they'll charge you like $10, $15 and they'll take care of it.
Yeah, mine's another brand. It's audio something. I forget.
Are these sound generators?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are either Amplisound or...
Yeah, they're Amplisound. That's it.
Yeah, no, those are great. These are such great guys. These are one of the first ones. They have the Jasterboff chip in them. They hardly ever break down. You have to basically squash them with your car. You know, I mean, they're so durable.
Yeah, word to the wise.
They're so durable.
I consider myself warned.
But you do have to clean them every night.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But if you ever have trouble, you just call me up. I can even send you the parts in the mail. Just
Wow. Wow, that's great.
How did
fast.
Caroline find you?
Yeah, I think we just had a little conversation. We just had a consultation, a talk. Because the thing is, and I feel sorry for you, because you go to the physician, they have 7 minutes. You have 7 minutes. I actually had a problem with my eye. I said, I want to see a consultation, extended consult. I work in the field, right? You know what? I'm sitting there with him. I just was talking to him. You know what I heard in his pocket? Ding. I'm not kidding. I said, what was that? He goes, oh, it's a new system we're trying out. I said, I'm not an egg. I called for an extended consultation. I'm willing to pay for it, and you're timing me like an egg? But how do you deal with tinnitus? You can't do that in 7 minutes. So anyway, go to the audiologist because they're your treatment people. Unless you have a tumor in your head or something that they can do something about, you're going to end up with the audiologist anyway. We are the therapists, the treatment providers. So find a good audiologist, get a consultation. You know, there's lots of us around. We're almost all real nice, but I can tell you that's probably about as far as I can go tonight. It's been very interesting. You guys are a great audience, and I hope you do find some relief.
My name is Karen Willard, and I have a cochlear implant. And I started a cochlear implant support group in May, and we are reconvening in November. The first meeting is November 2nd, and it's going to be at the Carnegie room at McMinnville Library from 6 to 7:30. And it's not just for people with cochlear implants, it's for anyone that has hearing loss, is considering a cochlear implant, or would just like to learn more about the benefits of a cochlear implant. So I hope you can make it.
My name's Eric Gabrielson, and like a lot of folks, I suffer from tinnitus, and I got connected with a group here in McMinnville called Hell's Bells Tinnitus Support Group. And eventually I got interested in getting our word out, so I'm the coordinator of our Facebook page, and that's kind of the main way we get information out about our monthly meetings. We've been meeting for a little bit more than a year now, and the really nice thing about our Facebook page is that we put announcements and news updates on tinnitus, new items about research, things like that. So it's a really nice resource, and our group, of course, meets monthly here in the Carnegie room of the McMinnville Public Library. And you know, it's a really nice way to connect with other folks with tinnitus and get some support. So this is our flyer, and you know, keep an eye out at the library or on our Facebook page. And of course, all you would need to do is search Facebook for Hell's Bells Tinnitus Support Group.